Excuse me. There you go. Hey, everybody. I'm Lisa Allen.
And I'm Laura Alley. Welcome to our show today.
We are LA Squared. You know what, Laura? I was thinking I want to call ourselves the Broad Pod. I know we're the broadcast, but I was thinking about this over the weekend. I like Broad Pod because it's a podcast.
Yeah.
What do you think?
The broadcast Broad Pod or just the Broad Pod?
I don't know, Tom. What do you think?
I'm not going to answer that question.
I don't know.
Well, we got the broadcast because of all the talk last election about all the broadcasts, and all the like Joe Rogans, all the broadcasts that were all like the buzz and popular. We're like, we need a broadcast. So that's what gave us the idea.
I like it. I don't know why I was thinking about it. I just thought I'd run it by you. If anybody has any thoughts on it, they should email us and text us. Well, today, Laura, I grew up in the 80s. Did you grow up in the 80s?
I did.
Yeah. And back in the 80s, communism was a big conversation, with the Cold War, the wall coming down. I graduated in 1990 and I went to Germany for my graduation. And I had the good fortune of chipping away at the East Berlin Wall. And I got a piece of the East Berlin Wall, some East Berlin money, and watched the wall come down and went to the Pink Floyd concert, The Wall. So
cool.
So those are some of my earliest memories of the 80s and communism. And interestingly enough, I feel as though there's been this growth and talk of autocracies, less so of communism, but really around Marxism and socialism, especially with Mondani in New York City, right? Are you following that? Eric Adams, you guys, by the way, he dropped out.
I saw that yesterday.
Yep.
I can't tell if that's good or bad I can't tell how that'll affect the race.
I don't know. What do you think, Tom? Before we jump in and introduce
I actually don't think it's going to matter much.
Yeah.
No.
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, today, because of, of Mondani and all the discussion around fascism and socialism and communism, we thought it would be a really great segment to have Tom Ferguson on to talk about communism, capitalism, socialism, fascism. What are the differences between the governmental structures? So, Tom, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to read a little bio on you that you gave me, but then we're going to have you talk a little bit deeper into your background and why you're here talking about these topics. So for everybody that's watching, Tom Ferguson is a financial consultant and strategist in the finance healthcare industry, working with entrepreneurs, setting up new companies in response to the quickly changing health environment. Tom started his corporate career at Western Electric, which is AT&T, and spent 20 years in various roles, primarily in finance, M&A, corporate strategy, including postings in Europe and Asia. And when I say postings, like you lived there. That's what you mean, right? And then you left AT&T as vice president of business development and strategy for AT&T Asia Pacific and China. You then co-founded, and I think this is super interesting, you co-founded and ran a new company in the gemological laboratory field, providing specialized testing apparatus to gem laboratories, particularly in the area of color analysis, light perception, and behavior, inclusion analysis, and gem cutting. After a decade of the venture, you left to live in China with your family, and upon return, you started your work in the healthcare finance. So you've earned a BA and MBA from William & Mary, and I can't thank you enough to come on and talk about this very important topic.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You forgot something important.
Wait,
you forgot something important in his bio. He's the brother of our Morris County Commissioner, Christine Myers, who was our podcast guest. Remember a couple episodes ago when we had the Republicans and the Democrats on talking about the whatever that rally was or that protest at the time. So she was on already. Your sister was already on. It's like a family affair. We should have they have 10, there's 10 of them, 10 siblings together. We should have all 10 on. Would that be a good
it would be a little raucous, I think.
I think it would be the most fun episode we have.
Great to have you, Tom. Great to have you, Tom.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming on. So, Tom, tell us a little bit about your background and why. I mean, you and I have had so many conversations, but why are you the right person to come on and talk about communism, socialism, fascism, and how they're all related and what it means to us today?
Well, again, thanks for having me on. I think that I have had the rare experience of living in Europe in the 80s when in Holland and working in lots of other places when it was very socialistic. And socialism was very, very not only important in Europe, but was probably the mainstream political philosophy. I had 3 postings also in China. So I can say that I also lived in a communist country several times. So I've had, I started studying political philosophy back in college. I was a history major and I did a lot of work in political philosophy at that time. And that was one of the interests I had when I moved into lots of different countries. I started working in the Middle East in the late 70s, and that included Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, etc. And that included Iran during the revolution. I spent some time working in Asia. That included Korea, Taiwan, China, etc. Then in the mid 80s, that's when I moved to Europe, and I ended up living in Holland, but I worked in France, Germany, Italy, Denmark, the UK, Spain, and a bunch of other places. So I got, and my role in telecom made it possible for me to not only deal with the foreign telecom manufacturers, but because telecom is generally thought of as a utility, I also had to deal with the governments. And so I had a lot of experience dealing with government officials who were by and large socialists. And so you have to learn a lot about how they view the world if you want to actually work with them. And that applied again when I moved to, back to the States, and then of course back to China. I had, for the first time I was there, Ellen and I lived in Hong Kong. I had an office in Hong Kong and an office in Beijing, because I not only was responsible for China, but also all of Asia Pacific. And then later we moved back to Shanghai for Ellen's job. So I got another bite of the apple at dealing with the Chinese bureaucracy. But moving around to all these places, it's always been an interest of mine to try and understand the social fabric of the country, not only understanding the language and the cuisine, but also how people think. And you learn very quickly that people in different cultures think very, very differently from how they think in the United States. And 2 of those things had to do with, in Europe, socialism, and then of course in China it was communism. So that's really the background of why I have an interest in it and why I've had basically a lifetime of dealing with these political philosophies on both a personal and professional level.
Yeah. I would say all of the structures, I don't know, are they really economic or government structure when you talk about fascism, communism, and socialism?
Well, those systems, fascism, communism, socialism, are fundamentally different from capitalism, in that capitalism is merely and singularly an economic system. The other 3 are social systems. In other words, they encompass everything. Mm-hmm. You can have both democratic and non-democratic systems, but they don't really, but capitalism doesn't really depend on that. It's merely a way of looking at how certain economic decisions are made. But under socialism and communism, there's nothing that doesn't fall. Everything falls within their purview. Nothing is too small for a socialist or communist government to actually dip their fingers into. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of Americans found living particularly in a socialist way, because frankly, when we were living in China as a foreigner, yes, you don't get YouTube and there's lots of restrictions on things, but they pretty much leave you alone. I actually found that living in socialist Europe a little bit more debilitating, only because I thought it was going to be closer to what I had experienced in the States, and I found it more like a shroud. There was There's lots and lots of things the government opined on and prevented me from doing because that was the socialistic way.
Can you give an example of one of those
Sure.
things?
When I was living in Holland, there were 13 TV stations and only 2 channels. So the stations shared the channels, and the way that they had broadcast hours or rights had to do with everybody had their own little TV Guide magazine, and according to their number of subscribers, that's how they parceled out the time. Now, Americans would find that a little debilitating, but
Right.
that's how they did it.
Well, some would argue that back in the 80s, there was really only a couple news stations. So how does that differ? That everybody's like, you
It would
only had
be like,
ABC,
I think it would be like back in the 80s, it was ABC, NBC, CBS, right? And then you'd had like PBS, but it would probably be like them all sharing one station.
One channel. They're all on
big
channel
channels,
2.
yeah.
And from 11 to 4 was one station, and from 4 to 7 was another station. And
Oh,
from
I see what you mean.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That's how they did it.
So what about why do you think it's so popular all of a sudden, or it seems to be getting so popular, the thought of socialism in the United States?
I think there's a couple reasons. One is the fact that you'll find that socialism and communism are basically utopian ideas, and they always appeal to the young, and they appeal to the disenfranchised. And from my reading, it seems that from the latest financial issues back in 2008 to 2012, there are a lot of people felt disenfranchised and felt like they failed, and they felt like the system failed them. And so most people are not willing to concede that they failed. Their idea is that, they're good people and they should be rewarded for being good people. And so you have a lot of people now who believe that the system needs to be changed so that they're not in such dire straits. And so you have I'll say the old line Democrat, socialist / communist like Bernie Sanders.
Bernie Sanders, yeah, I was just gonna say that.
Right, and then you have the new group led by AOC and the Squad, and now Mamdani, and their view is they're trying to correct the failures of the current system, and their appeal is basically to the people in New York City who basically can't afford New York City, and they're trying to say, look. We have a way to solve these problems, and I think the way to look at it is that, why would anybody look at communism or socialism, systems that have always failed?
I was just going to say that
in the past, they've always failed. And,
is there an example of it succeeding anywhere?
Well, there is one example of a communist system that has persevered for about 1,000 years, and that's in a monastery. Monasteries, are self-selecting. They vote and select an abbot about every 5 years. They work and they actually truly can do each according to their needs, each according to their ability. So if I'm a very good winemaker, I make the wine, and if somebody else is a better baker, they bake the bread, and not vice versa. And when you get old, they take care of you.
Yeah.
Right. But for all the reasons why it works in a monastery, or all the reasons why it can't work in the general population. For one thing, you can leave a monastery, but most importantly, you don't have a family for which you are responsible.
Great point.
Right. So there is no, you don't have a spouse and you don't have children that you are responsible for. So one of the things that happens in a utopian system is they wish away problems. And so one of the things that, I learned, because we also had to work in the Eastern Bloc, they had what were called community creches. They would basically take the children and raise them as part of the community. They wanted to break the bond between the parent and the child. That's one of the, I think, fundamental problems with communism, and in some ways socialism, is that it fails on two levels. One, it's a utopian idea that depends on two ideas that actually are failures. One is that it requires people not to act like people. They have to become fundamentally different creatures. And the other thing is that it's bad economics. It doesn't work because the economics don't work. And they all try and wish away the idea that it will this time because they seem to know better. But it won't work. It can't work. And but every 25 years or so, you have a group of young people who are willing to try, because it's a roll of the dice to basically divvy up a lot of stuff that's not theirs.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah. What does the Mamdani mayor look like in New York when he starts January 1st? What are your thoughts?
Well, hopefully he's not going to start January 1st. I just have to throw that out there into the universe.
Well, I think he will. I think he is going to win.
Help us.
I think he's going to win. There's a lot of things that he wants to do that I don't think legally he can do. For instance, one thing, I don't think he has any impact on taxes. I don't think the mayor of New York can set taxes. I think only the state can do that. But one of the things you need to be aware of is that there are many members of the city council who are actually to the left of Mamdani. And so it used to be that the mayor had people he was fighting with. In this case, they're all going to be supporting him. So one of the things that he's going to be able to do is, I think he'll be able to have a tremendous impact on the police situation.
That's what worries me the most.
He'll appoint the police commissioner, and he will, I think, continue the issues of no cash bail and releasing prisoners and all that stuff, which will, I think, have a very, very bad impact on it. I think also he's going to try and make sure that all the businesses know that, as far as he's concerned, they should be working for him. Now, I don't know that he can tax them, but I think he's going to try and create a whole bunch of regulations that will be very detrimental to their businesses. Then the real question is, if Hochul gets elected, she has, because that'll happen about a year later, will she then roll over and support some of his, I'll say, insaner ideas? For instance, this idea of having grocery stores run by the city. Why is it that grocery stores aren't in the cities now? And the answer is because of regulations and things like theft. So if he's going to then start, now who is it in the city council that actually knows how to run a grocery store? Well, none of them do. And their view is, as I found that with most socialist government people, they have very, very little respect for people in the private sector. They think people in the private sector are not very smart, or they could be clever, but basically all they are is, they're focused on nothing but greed. And that they, as socialist ministers, come from the top schools in each and every country. And therefore they, very similar to, I think, Elizabeth Warren's attitude, that they should be in the position to tell businesses what to do, because they indeed know better, and that they know who the benefits of that business to whom that should accrue, i.e. the workers and the customers, certainly not the shareholders.
We'll talk about the basis of socialism too. I mean, it believes that the workers should be, if a business is started, then the workers should share in the fruit of that labor, that they're not really getting paid to work per se, but they're getting they're getting back the revenue that the business makes. So can you just kind of talk through what that means? Because it's so foreign to us that I actually did a little research around it, Tom, and there is one Spanish company that has made it work. Monduga, I think it is. Right.
It is probably the only larger group of larger corporation that's actually is owned by and run by the workers. In the United States and other places, it's always failed. People forget that TWA used to be pretty much run by the union, and it failed. The idea that you hear these politicians of the left talking about the means of production being owned by the workers. Now, we would assume that to mean that the people in the factory producing tires, that factory would, in a sense, be owned by those factory workers. In fact, that's actually not true. What they really mean is that because they're talking in philosophical terms, that the proletariat are the workers, and therefore the means of production is owned by the proletariat. But what that actually means is that it's owned by the government, right? Not by the individual workers themselves. And the reason is very clear, is that if you work in a factory that is critical to the economy, then you and your fellow workers could basically bankrupt the government. I mean, by saying, here, we're going to triple our wages and triple our, in a sense, profit. And the government, of course, could never let that happen. So what really happens is that the government owns everything, and that the idea being is that the workers will share in what they call profits, but it's not really the profits. It's whatever is the recompense that goes to that factory is then split up among those workers, and that the workers theoretically can be democratic and democratically elect their own board of I'll say executives, people who are going to decide what to do. The problem is that the source of capital has to come from the government and not the private sector. And so the fundamental issue here is that the socialist and communist ideas is that they need to get rid of private capital. And that, by the way, that's different from personal property. Private property is you owning a business. A piece of personal property is like your clothes. The problem is that you can't accrue anything of a personal nature that has any real value, because the government says, well, that's too much and that should belong to everybody. And so only the government can actually bankroll a new business, and they don't, because one of the failures of the communist system is you have to back up a second, is that the Marxian idea of economics is actually very bad in my estimation, because Marx was a very bad economist. In fact, I would say he wasn't an economist at all. What he was focused on was distribution. If you look at these left-wing economists or social, philosophers, if you will, all they do is talk about how they need to have a better division of what exists. They never talk about how it exists. So if you listen to Mamdani and you listen to AOC, you listen to Bernie Sanders, they all start with, we're a rich country. We have what we need. We just need to make sure it gets to the proper people. The problem with that idea is that if you divided everything today, then nobody would actually produce anything for tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And therefore, that's why the system crashes. Look at Cuba. Are people going to say that Fidel and Raul and the others weren't really good communists? They were. Right now, they're also autocrats and they live like kings, but basically they got rid of private property. And like they found out in the Soviet Union, they don't produce anything, right? It doesn't work as a system because they don't have a way of incenting people to work. And so the only thing they can do is say, we're going to divide it more and more equally. And the problem is that the loaf of bread gets smaller and smaller every year.
What about his plan, which I find preposterous, to purchase privately owned property and make that city owned, I guess, and distribute it? How feasible is something that outlandish?
Well, it's only feasible because he's doing it with taxpayers' money. I mean, one of the falsehoods of the left idea is that the money they get from taxes is their money, but they don't produce anything. They take it from people who produce things, and eventually that money runs out.
It's going to run out if nobody's producing anything,
right? And so he could take tax money if the city allows him to and the state allows him to. I don't know exactly how that would work, but he can take that money. He can offer a price to anybody. The question he's going to have to answer is, can he use the city government to condemn property and take it through eminent domain?
Oh my God.
Well, it's not
Right.
a far reach, Laura. I
This
mean, look
is
at the farm
crazy.
in Cranberry, right?
That's
How
true.
our housing policy allows for eminent domain, and Cranberry's farm was going to be taken away. So, I mean, I think there's been an uprising against that, but it's not really far off. I mean, look, I don't know enough about it, but what I do know is NYCHA, which was the housing authority in New York, ended up being a failure, right? It went bankrupt. And so it's we have a lot of need for people, but I do feel like our government has become so bloated that they don't manage housing well. They don't manage much well, I should say.
They really don't.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that you run up against is that the people in the government on the left, socialists and communists, have no interest in acting efficiently, because there's no reason for them to act efficiently, right? There's no pricing mechanism, and there's really no philosophical mechanism that says that you wasted money. For instance, when de Blasio was in office, his wife, McCrae, I think her name was, she was put in charge of a project for looking at the homeless situation, particularly among the mentally ill. And that project cost the city, I think, about $850 million. After 3 years of her running this project, there were still homeless and mentally ill people running around. And somebody asked her, what happened to the $850 million? And she said, "Don't ask me. I'm not an accountant."
Oh my God, help us.
Now, why would she answer like that so quickly? And I think that she actually believed it. It's that the efficiency of using city money is not a concern, because they're doing, in this regard, they're doing the right thing. And the fact that it didn't work is not the problem. The problem is there either wasn't enough money, or that these horrible people on the right were sabotaging the effort. But you'll never find the people on the left saying, you know what, that program we had, it was a great idea, but it just doesn't work. We should take the money and do something else with it. That will never happen. And the reason is that in their mind, the intent is more important than the activity itself. Right? And so as a result of that, if you question whether or not it actually works, in their mind, you're questioning the intent. And that is something that they cannot brook.
Right. I keep going back to the idea that whether you're a socialist, whether you're a Marxist, whether you're a communist or a fascist, it all kind of it falls under the umbrella of authoritarianism. And I believe that when you look around the world, I think that we are falling closer to authoritarianism than we've ever been in history. I mean, do you feel like we are sort of, and not that it's dire, because I know that you are very hopeful for the future, Tom. I have been a little concerned about where we're headed. But how do we get through this period where there's a lot of people who have a lot of control that have very little interest for truly the people, even though under the guise of saying they care about the people?
Yeah, I think it might be helpful to give it a little historical perspective on that. That up until basically the late 1600s and 1700s, every government basically had been authoritarian. They were run by basically a feudal monarchy, or an emperor, or a warlord. They were all, by definition, authoritarian, and many of them quite cruel. So it wasn't really until you had, the idea in the basically promulgated by the wars of religion in Western Europe, the idea that you were going to have this idea of freedom of conscience, and that the idea of having religion separate from the monarch, but in this case it was technically associated with the monarch, became something that was going to be allowed. And And so you have this experiment with democracy in the United States, followed by in the United Kingdom. But remember, most people didn't get to vote, until the mid 1800s, and that meant white men, because there were poll taxes. So women in these countries got to vote about 50 years later, but most men couldn't vote either. It was the landed gentry that actually had the power. And so there was up until we're only talking about 150 years, maybe a little bit more, where democracy has actually been accepted as a reasonable view for government. And that when you look at fascism is by itself an autocratic form of government. There is by definition, communism or socialism does not have to be non-democratic. It can be democratic. The problem is that both socialism, but more importantly, communism, they always turn out to be authoritarian governments, because the root issue for communism is the idea of equity. Their whole political philosophy is based on equity. And when you boil it down, as they all did, equity means the same. Everybody gets the same pair of shoes. Everybody gets the same thing for dinner. Everybody gets the same pair of glasses. Because if there's a difference, somebody will ask why. One of the things I learned living in Holland was that the single most important emotion engendered by socialism was envy or jealousy. People really did wonder, how did they get that? What did they do to get that? It's not right. Everybody should have the same. And if it's not the same, then somebody did something wrong. So the government has really only one thing that they can do, and that is to impose equity, i.e. sameness, from the top. And so what happens is you end up with a group of people at the top who have to be willing to impose their ideas of sameness on everybody. And therefore they become autocrats.
I think in some ways, people just, our general human nature is we want to be free, right? It's socialism to me is putting humans in a cage, a metaphorical cage, that if you want to be free, you want to have the ability to make decisions on your own. And socialism sort of puts you in a box that says just exactly what you said, that everybody's the same, everybody gets the same. And it goes against the grain of our human nature, which
well you're right, and that's why, as part of this utopian idea, is that it fails because it forces a human being not to be human anymore. Right. I will always love my children more than yours. I will always want to do something maybe that makes me feel happy about doing something. It could be as easy as, I really like to bake for whatever reason, but I work in a tire store, and somebody says, but you're producing for the society. Yeah, but I don't like it. But that doesn't matter, right? Because that's been my assignment. And you're asking people, therefore, to really be cogs in a wheel. But more importantly, what happens is the government can not tolerate people saying, I want to be different, because then everybody wants to be different. And then you therefore no longer have equity.
Right. I mean, what do you think we could do, though, to get everything back on what I think is the right track? Obviously, that's my belief and perception.
I think that I'm not alone in this anymore. I know that George Will came out about a month ago and said every 20 or 25 years, it's important to have a small closed experiment with socialism so people can find out how bad it really is. Because one of the things that I found when I was living in Europe, when it was very socialistic, is one by one, all these countries went down the socialist path. Holland, Germany, Denmark, France, they all went down this way. And by the late 90s and early 2000s, they were all effectively bankrupt, right? It didn't work. And they all tried it, right? And so unfortunately, you can try and tell these people that there are economic reasons why their theory doesn't work. For instance, neither communism or socialism deals with the idea of risk. And one of the things you hear about from these kids is it's wrong that I should have to work 2 jobs to feed myself and afford a place to live, because that's just not right. And so how do you decide what risk to take? Now, the Europeans have decided that the way they're going to deal with it is that they're really going to try and prevent people from risking. And the way they do that is through taxation. So anybody that has a very successful company is going to be basically lose it through taxes. And the other thing is through social rules, is that if you ever go bankrupt in Europe, you'll never get another job. And your friends and family will abandon you and you're done. And the reason is they don't want people to risk. Wow. Right? They just don't like it. And so their view is the way we deal with risk is we prevent it from happening, because in their view, they have such a strong social compact, strong safety net, that if you fail, they have to pick up the pieces. Yeah. And so their deal is, look, since we have to provide this benefit to you, your obligation is not to risk it. So they don't.
I know we're winding down, but I have a quick question about China, because under communist China, some argue that it's a democratic communist country.
No.
Right, capitalist. I shouldn't say Democrat. I should say capitalist. So talk a little bit about that just briefly, because there is a little bit of cognitive dissonance in that.
Sure. So Mao died in 1976, and they threw the Gang of Four in prison. And several years later, Deng Xiaoping became, the leader. And he saw what had happened to the economy under Mao and his strict communist and somewhat crazy ideas. And he decided to allow basically people to start running businesses and accumulating wealth. Well, that worked out pretty well, but the idea in China was, as long as we give people economic freedom and economic benefits, we will not allow them, and they will not demand political freedom. And so what you need to appreciate is that the Communist Party in China sits above the government. They're not the same thing. All right. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah, the party sits above the government. Now, it used to be like in all, I'll say, truly communist groups, they have an idea that any group of people getting together needs to be controlled by the government. So when we were living there, this is 10 years ago now, I think it was the Flower Club of Shanghai, for the first time was going to have a president that was not by law a member of the Communist Party. Mm-hmm. There's a deep suspicion of any gathering of people under communism that is not part of the communist regime. Now, what has happened is that Xi Jinping has said things have gone way too far. We're going to ratchet things back, and that guys like Jack Ma and others need to be reined in. And we're not going to let them run around getting billions of dollars and getting wealthy. They need to basically start working again for the government. Now, one of the things in large corporations in China was the second most powerful person was the VP of HR. And the reason was that was always a party affiliate, right? Always. And so that's how they basically made sure that the corporation was running according to rules and regulations that they liked. So there was never any political freedom in China. And their view was people don't really want political freedom as long as the government is delivering a better economic system for them.
Well, they didn't when they were protesting in Hong Kong.
Well, Hong Kong was a little different because it was a territory controlled by the UK. It was very, very successful. But after the handover, the Chinese decided, they had this agreement that they were going to run two systems for 50 years. I was actually surprised that the mainland Chinese let it go as far as it did. And they just couldn't stand to let it happen, because one of the same problems that China has is the same problem that Russia has, is that their idea is that the Chinese people, is incompatible with democracy. And by having Hong Kong be there and being so successful, it was an idea that this could happen on mainland China as well. And of course, that Xi Jinping couldn't let that happen.
Right.
The same issue is in the Ukraine. They've made a lot of issues that in Russia, that Ukraine is and always has been part of Russia. Same culture, language, etc. That's not true, but that's the story. Well, excuse me. If you have a Ukraine that is economically more prosperous than mainland Russia, so to speak, it just shows that the system in Russia is at fault. And that's something Putin cannot allow.
Yeah.
Well,
You've left us speechless.
I know.
Okay.
It's interesting, but it's scary, So it's like, it's very interesting to me, but it's also very scary.
Well, unfortunately, I think what has to happen, and I, as I said, I hope that in a way Mamdani wins so people can see how bad it is.
Hi, vey.
Because, and by the way, I'm not saying that that's a good thing. I'm just saying that that's a practical thing, because it's going to cost a lot. The damage that these people do to their economies is amazing.
Right.
And it takes decades to recover. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be any alternative, because they're basically selling a bill of goods to people who have nothing. And all they're saying is that, you know what, there's enough money and there's enough food and there's great places to live, and those people have it and you deserve it.
Yeah.
And when you don't have anything, what's the downside?
Right.
Right? There isn't.
You're right. That's what they talk about.
Right
but
now,
I just have to pray the election goes a different way. I have a son that goes to school in the city downtown and 2 kids that work there. And it worries me, like what can happen to the police presence and just the bedlam that could occur.
Yeah, it's look at what, Lisa, you brought up NYCHA. I think it's important to understand why NYCHA exists. And the reason why NYCHA exists was that for years and years and years, the Rent Control Board in New York City prevented the owners of apartment buildings to raise rents in accordance with their costs. And so what happened was more and more of the owners of buildings basically stopped maintaining them, and they became worse and worse and worse. And then after 20 years of no maintenance, and also they stopped paying taxes, they would basically declare the building bankrupt and turn it over to the city. And that's how NYCHA was born, was because they had all these abandoned properties. The problem again is that they have no idea how to run a property. They don't know what to do. And so, they were fined. I don't know how much money, but I remember it being a huge amount of money because they weren't maintaining the buildings either. So, how is it that the city is going to be a better landlord than anybody else? And the fundamental reason is that these people believe they deserved a place to live and they shouldn't have to pay rent for it. Now, there was an ad, not an ad. I remember when Giuliani was running for the second time, they did an interview with some guy out in Long Island, in Brooklyn, I think. And he had a beautiful 4-bedroom apartment overlooking Long Island Sound. And he was paying, I think, $800 a month. And he said to this reporter, who said, they could get $4,000 a month from this apartment, and they want to turn me out just so this guy can make more money. And of course, the reporter dutifully said, "That's horrible. This is your home. You've been here for 20 years. Yeah, he's been there for 20 years, and the guy who owned the building has not been able to make a decent return. And so the issue is that who deserves the property? And the answer is, for a socialist, property should be owned by everybody. Therefore, we have no responsibility.
Right.
Well, Karl Marx, I mean, I would say that Karl Marx is the father, right, of Marxism, communism, socialism. And essentially, his premise is no personal property, no religion, no country or borders.
Right.
I mean
Sounds
that's
like
really
John Lennon,
right.
Yeah.
right?
Song Imagine. Yeah.
Exactly.
Um,
Right.
Imagine
There is
all the.
only
Should I end by singing a song?
right. There's only the state, and there's only other people. That's it.
That's it.
Right. And I do want to say this though. I you know, it's difficult. Rent is very expensive. And so I think that there are some issues that we need to deal with in terms of making life more affordable. There's a balance, but affordability comes in the responsibility of taxes, not necessarily trying to intervene with private business and people. So rents would be more manageable if our government handled their budgets more prudently. I feel like there's a lot of things that we can look at how they're spending money rather than just saying, we're not going to increase your rent. We're going to freeze it. And then that gives you the inability to not be able to upgrade your apartment buildings, because that creates an unsafe environment for everybody, not just the people living there. Right.
Mhm.
So
True.
Right.
Tom, do you have a way that people could follow you? Do you have an Instagram or a LinkedIn group? Or
I have none of that.
You don't want to be followed.
No.
Okay.
Nobody needs to follow me.
he's just one of the smartest people I know, Laura. That's why I was like, Tom, you have to
cool.
come on and talk about Mondani and what this all means for us.
Yeah, no, it was great. It was great having you, Tom. You are a wealth of information. Hopefully you come back.
Anytime.
Awesome.
Thank you.
All right,
It's
great.
so good to see you, Tom.
Thank you.
So good to see you. So good to see you, Lisa. You
too.
guys have a great day. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We'll be back with a new episode very soon. Have a great one.
Okay. Thanks a lot.